Okay, welcome to Co-Teaching Beyond Theory and the Benefits, Part 2. I welcome you back. One of the things that I have experienced in my work with schools and in the classroom is that one continual concern and question comes up. How do I have enough time to use all the strategies in the classroom we're asked to use when I have so much to do and so little time? So the general education teacher feels this way. Add to that, the special education teacher may or may not have time to plan with the co-teacher. And the special education teacher has other challenges, whether it's testing, whether it's IEP meetings, whether it's crises that happen in the hallway, and so on and so forth. Big issue is the overwhelm that I'm seeing with teachers right now and the difficulty with getting it all in. Principals are saying the same thing to me. Administrators are saying, you know, my teachers have had the training, but they tell me they don't know how to fit it into the lesson plan. So how do we manage this? How do we make this work? Especially when there is not enough time. Well, one solution to address this problem, and I have two for you, but one solution is to really look critically at what you have in your lesson plan, what is in the departmentalized PowerPoint and lesson plan for your class, what is in the textbook and the teacher's manual, what did you do last year, and what do you really need to do this year. Basically, look at your lesson plan, use your professional judgment, and determine, what do I need to do? What is going to get me to the goal intended with the students? What is going to teach them most effectively and most efficiently in the minutes that I have in this class? If we can do that, if we can focus on that question, we are more likely to be able to make the time to include what we need to include in a class period. So many times our textbooks, our lesson plans, our curriculum, our scripted programs have much more in place for us to do in a class period than what we actually have available to us. Now, especially when you consider that scripted programs and programs, PowerPoints, teachers' manuals that are handed down from a publishing company, they don't know how many minutes are in your class period. You might have 40, you might have 47, you might have 43, you might have 50, you might have 80. And so these lesson plans are generically created so they could fit an average range of minutes in a class period. The other thing that I think happens is many of the people who are creating lesson plans are not necessarily trained or in the mindset of really looking at what is being done, what you're being recommended to do, and asking the most important question. Will this make the maximum use of my time so that students will learn? For example, one of the big controversial issues is copying notes. There is no research to back up the fact that copying notes, while done in schools, increases achievement. Just look back to Robert Marzano's book way back in 1995. He documented it in his book in the note-taking section. There is absolutely no research to back up that copying notes, that physical act, increases achievement. So why are we doing something over and over again at our secondary schools that has absolutely no research behind it? Well, we do it because we've always done it. And we really need to rethink this process. Maybe copying a few notes, maybe copying skeleton notes, maybe copying a few math problems. But here's the deal. When students are copying notes, not only is it not proven to be effective for most learners to increase achievement, they're not actually doing any higher level critical thinking skills, whether copying notes. Rather, they are just copying a mechanical act. But here's the other thing. When I watch teachers use a PowerPoint and have students copy the screen on a PowerPoint into their notebook, I see the teacher teach, wait for the student to complete the copying of the slide. Sometimes the teacher is talking because they're not writing themselves, so they can talk while the slide's up, and students can't talk and listen and write down at the same time. That's a huge problem. But the other thing that happens is the teacher's finished, so the teacher then moves to the next slide. And the next thing I see as that third set of eyes in the back of the room are hands going up and saying, Miss, could you please go back to that slide? So the teacher goes back to the slide, and what then happens is the teacher waits and waits and waits. And then finally says, okay, is everybody done copying? And then the teacher goes on to the next slide. And when the teacher gets to the next slide and finishes what they have to say, and then wants to move on, the same thing happens. Hands go up. I once timed this process in a classroom, and the teacher lost 8 minutes of teaching time while waiting for kids to copy. Now, in this day and age where we have so much to do in so little time, I, as a teacher, would look at that and say, ask, is that the best use of my time? I don't think it is. I really, really don't think it is. If I'm going to have students copy notes, then I'm going to do it so that it's incredibly efficient, and I'm only going to have them copy what's most important. I definitely would not have a whole class period or even half of a class period where students are copying notes. It just takes too much valuable learning time away from what we're trying to do in the classroom. So that's the first thing. Focus on what's most important and choose strategies in the classroom that reach our goals. Look at your grade level expectations. Look at your standards. What do you need to teach? Now, the other thing that I want to share is this concept of chunking lesson plans. And I have this little baby face here because that's probably the way some of you will look at me as I'm explaining this, this option for breaking up our class period. Okay, here's the deal. I've spent many hours in the classroom observing teachers teach, and what I see is I see teachers spending anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes doing a direct teach, a lecture, a lesson. This is especially at the secondary level. However, I have even seen it in first grade, where students are listening and taking in information passively. And after watching this process several times, I've realized that we can probably teach the core of our lesson in 10 minutes to 5 capable students sitting at a table, a small group, and working with just those students. If I sat at a table with 5 capable students and really focused in on what I wanted to teach them, watched their eyes, looked at their faces and got their expressions, asked them questions, zeroed in on what they were learning, they could probably learn most initial concepts that we're teaching in the classroom in 10 minutes. Most of the teachers I've surveyed can agree that we could teach the basic concept of genre in 10 minutes to 5 capable students in a small group. We can teach the basis of osmosis or diffusion in the same format. We could teach the basis of the order of operations. Now, we're not talking about being an expert, but we're talking about getting that lesson out there so that students could start practicing it. We can do that in 10 minutes. But here's what happens. We don't have a small group of 5 capable students. We have a whole class. Sometimes we have a class of 45 students. And as we teach that lesson, we get through the 10 minutes and we look around the room and we see that there are still some students who need more of an example. Or maybe even our lesson plan is dictating how we do that. And we have to do 10 problems in the lesson plan, not 3. So we end up doing the 10. we go on another 10 minutes. So 20 minutes later, we look at the class and we've maybe talked about genre for 20 minutes and given many different examples in a direct teach. And we look at the back of the room and we see Johnny on an IEP still looks very, very confused. So we decide to do one or two more very easy examples, and we just speak more slowly. Okay, so we finish. It's 25 minutes into class. Now we might have a 40-minute session, and we're thinking, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to get this done? How will I finish everything I'm supposed to teach in the classroom? So what do? We then pick up, maybe have students practice individually. We walk around the room. We try to get to all those raised hands because there are several kids that don't get it. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and obviously I can't see your response because this is a webinar, a virtual classroom here. However, I've done this many, many times in front of an audience, so I pretty much know what I'm going to get as a response. Would you agree that those 5 capable students in the classroom, in a small group, learned what I was trying to teach about genre in the first 10 minutes, even though I was working with a big group, the whole class? The answer I usually get is, actually always get, is yes. Those 5 students got it in 10 minutes, even though you were teaching the whole class. Okay, so what were they doing for the next 15 minutes? Most people agree that they were probably bored, twiddling their thumbs, or possibly even getting into trouble. Okay, so would you also agree that at the end of 25 minutes, there are still students in the classroom that need more practice? They are getting it, they've got the basic concept, but they're not ready to take the test yet. Most people would agree, yes. Would you agree that after 25 minutes of doing that direct teach, there are still students who have absolutely no clue and need a reteach? And typically, the answer to that one is also yes. So I ask the question, why do we take 25 minutes of valuable class time to get to the very same place that we were in after 10? Why? What if we did something radical? What if what we did instead was simply stop teaching after 10 minutes, no matter who understood it or not? And then, instead of continuing to direct teach, we did something different. What if we did something different? What if instead we chunked our lesson plan? Let's imagine we have a 40-minute class. And let's say we have a lesson, a 2-day rotation. Okay, this can be changed. This is not carved in stone, but let's just play with this a little bit. Day 1, we do a 5-minute warm-up. We have, out of a 40-minute class, we have 35 minutes left. So we take 10 minutes and we do a core teach of, let's say, genre. All right, so we're teaching genre as if 5 capable students were in the room. However, we're teaching it with the whole class. After that 10 minutes, we stop. We have 25 minutes left to class. We set a timer to make sure this is managed well. We're going to time these sections of our lesson plans. We want them, and we'll use a visual timer so the students might be able to see the timer also. After we've taught for 10 minutes, we've given our core experience, maybe even the lesson plan we got handed down to us from the department or the curriculum director or even the publishing company says do 4 more examples. Well, instead of direct teaching them, what if we had the students in mixed ability groups that we actually determined what those were ahead of time? So we made sure that we had high students in each group, middle students in each group, and low students in each group. Let's say we have a group of 4. No more than 4, because after 4, achievement goes down. So then what we do is we teach those students The same concept, but in mixed ability groups, so they're teaching each other. While they're teaching each other, the two co-teachers in the room can walk around the room, ask essential questions, make sure students are on track, do some data collection, and actually determine what do the students understand, what do they not understand, so that when we then stop that activity after 10 minutes and have 15 minutes of class left, we've got 5 minutes to pull the class together and do another direct teach. If we have gone around the room and determined that students really are still confused as a whole, we can now do a couple more examples in a direct teach. If we have gone around the room and we just now communicate with each other before we start teaching again and say, hey, you know, they really get this. Maybe we put a couple more challenging questions up on the screen, but we've just done some data collection and know exactly where our students are at. Much better than if we had just been direct teaching for 20 minutes. And the same learning is happening. Okay, so we've done our 5 minutes of pulling the class back together and doing a direct teach again, and even either teacher could be doing that. So it doesn't have to be the general ed teacher, it could be the special education teacher doing that review. Now we've got 10 minutes left of class. I'm going to give the students a 1-minute assessment. No more than 1, 2, or maximum of 3 questions. You might call this a 1-minute assessment. You might call it an exit card, a ticket to leave, whatever you want to call it. You could even do it on whiteboards that students raise up and you just look at and count. And what you do is you ask a critical question or 2 or 3 that's easy to correct, that will give you the data, the information as to whether students were successful in learning that concept, whether they mostly got it but needed more practice, or whether they needed a complete reteach. And that is what you're going to use for day 2. You might have 5 minutes left of class. You rearrange the desk, get the class all cleaned up, get the kids sorted out, and move on to the next day. Day 2. After we've looked at these exit cards, now here's an example of a simple exit card, a ticket to leave. You might ask 3 things of the students. Okay, what did you learn about? List 3 things you learned. If it was math, you might give 1 math problem and score it on a scale of 1 to 3 on how they worked it out. 3 definitions or concepts that they learned in class. It could be anything. So you looked at these exit cards, and now day 2, you use that to determine what you're going to do on the next lesson. You have your 5-minute warm-up activity just like you did the day before, but this time maybe they're going over their homework together. All right, so they're working on their homework, and again, one teacher could be doing the classroom data collection as far as who's here, who's not here, attendance, collecting papers, whatever you're going to do. The other teacher's walking around the room and asking questions, or you're both walking around the room asking questions and figuring out where students are at. They could be in pairs, sharing their homework together. You've got 35 minutes left, right? Because you're only going to let that go on for 5 minutes. You take 5 minutes and you provide the instructions for the groups to get into what now will be their same ability groups. Now, we don't call out the groups and say, all right, those of you who got everything wrong yesterday, go over here. Those of you who got it right, go over there. The geniuses in the class, you're coming over here. And please don't do anything like that. Instead, just call out some names and say, okay, this list of kids, you're going to stand on this side of the room. This list of kids, go to the back of the room. This group of kids, I want you to go to the right in the room. Okay, now in your groups, here are your assignments. Now, the group that needs a reteach, it's a same ability group. You could have 4 kids in there, you could have 15 kids in that group. All right, you're going to teach them in a direct teach. One of you will, one of the 2 co-teachers. The other group will have a practice activity. It's what you would have taught anyway. It's not any extra work. The group you're reteaching, by the way, that's not usually any extra work either. Typically, you might even have the general education teacher doing the reteaching, because the general education teacher often has a lot of tips and tools and tricks in their pocket to be able to do that lesson. And then the group that got the material, they're your 5 capable students or more who would have gotten it after 10 minutes in a small group anyway. Well, they got it even when it was in the large group. instead of boring them with a reteach or boring them with more review, now we're going to give them a challenge. We're going to give them an extension activity. We're going to accelerate their learning by letting them reach higher, whether it's through a web quest, whether it's through creating a skit to then reinforce the learning with the rest of the class, a song, a skit, a chant, a poster, whether you have them do something to enhance the knowledge they already have. That is actually where you have more work, because that's something new that you might have to do. So when you look at the 3 groups, they are same ability group, but the beauty of it is, let's say Millicent was absent yesterday and didn't get the lesson at all. Millicent is in the reteach group, and now Millicent in 10 minutes will get that lesson, but you're only going to spend that 10 minutes. Might there still be students at the end of 10 minutes that don't understand the concept yet? Yes, I'm sure there will be. However, those students cannot hold the whole class back at this point. At this point, hopefully more of them are farther along, and those students are going to get additional help at another time of day, whether it's after school or in an RTI intervention period or somewhere else. As the teacher in this classroom, 10 minutes, you've got your kids accelerating, your kids practicing on level, and you've got your kids who had to reteach. Timer goes off, pull the class together, do 5 minutes of a direct teach Q&A, wrapping it up, and then you're going to do a new 10-minute core teach. This might be the lesson that in another teaching model you might have done at the beginning of class, but instead of doing it at the beginning of class or the next day because you were spent a whole period reteaching, you're doing it now in the middle. It's a little bit of a different approach on how to teach in using these chunks. However, it's amazing what I have seen teachers accomplish when done this way. And I learned this process by watching other amazing co-teachers use this type of a strategy. And yes, they even use timers and set the timers for each section of time. They've used this strategy effectively to get amazing amounts of information covered in a class period, including review. So this is the end of part 2, and after this we'll move on to part 3, which will be what is the best way to effectively ensure that both teachers have an active role in the classroom.